Welcome everyone to this webinar to mark the launch of VCMI's updated Carbon Markets Access Toolkit. My name is Bianca Gishangi and I'm the Regional Lead for Africa at VCMI. VCMI is very pleased to be co-hosting this webinar with our partners, the United Nations Development Programme and the Climate Vulnerable Forum and V20 Finance Ministers. Some brief housekeeping notes before we start. This webinar is available to listen in French, Spanish, and Portuguese through simultaneous translation. Instructions to access the language you would like are in the chat. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions throughout the webinar. We have a limited amount of time at the end of the panel to answer a selection of questions. On the agenda for our webinar today, we begin with an introduction to VCMI's Access Strategies program and an update on the Carbon Markets Access Toolkit, followed by a discussion with Angel Ureña, Deputy Director of Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment, Panama, a panel discussion with carbon market experts, and ending with closing remarks from His Excellency Mohamed Nasheed, Secretary General of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Let's begin. I welcome VCMI's Director of Policy and Partnerships, Lydia Sheldrick, to provide us with opening remarks. Over to you, Lydia.
Thank you, Bianca, and welcome everyone. Today at this event, co-hosted with our partners, UNDP and the Climate Vulnerable Forum, we're delighted to launch VCMI's updated Carbon Markets Access Toolkit. The toolkit provides step-by-step guidance for policymakers to determine if, when, and how to engage with carbon markets in a way that works for people, for nature, and the planet. This release is important because 10 years since the Paris Agreement was signed, we are not on track to meet the critical 1.5 temperature goal. While much progress has been made, it is clear we must go further and faster. And this depends on closing the climate finance gap. At COP29, countries agreed to efforts to mobilize $1.3 trillion annually by 2035. We need to mobilize all possible sources and get finance to the ground, to the places and people that need it most. Carbon credit markets are an underused tool to put a value on emissions reduced and removed and drive investment into the low carbon transformation. High integrity carbon credit markets with robust safeguards can drive efficiency, innovation, and investment into climate positive growth. And they are especially well placed to channel debt-free finance to the ground in the countries and communities vulnerable to climate impacts, delivering mitigation and, crucially, sustainable development benefits. But the landscape is complex. Compliance markets, Article 6, and voluntary carbon markets have been and will continue to evolve and interact increasingly. That's why, since its launch in 2021, VCMI's Access Strategies program has been working with local partners and governments to support emerging markets and developing economies to navigate carbon markets and determine how to effectively leverage them to support their national priorities. Building on the deep expertise and in-country experience gathered through this program, I am pleased to share the launch of VCMI's updated Carbon Markets Access Toolkit, developed in collaboration with our partners, UNDP and Climate Focus. The flexible structure of the toolkit helps policymakers to find advice relevant for them. Policymakers can use the toolkit, published in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese, today, to begin diving into questions such as, should my government engage with carbon markets? And if so, when? How can I create an Article 6 strategy? And how can I ensure only high-quality carbon projects are hosted in my jurisdiction? In less than 3 months, the international community will gather in Brazil for COP30. Harmonization of carbon markets is one of the presidency objectives. The toolkit released today is designed to help do just that. So let's get to work. Back to you, Bianca.
Thank you. Thank you, Lydia, for setting out the challenge and the need for enhanced support for carbon markets in developing countries, and emerging economies. I will now briefly present on VCMI's Carbon Markets Access Toolkit and the core updates in this version today. Next slide, please. VCMI's updated Carbon Markets Access Toolkit supports policymakers on carbon market engagement, providing an introductory overview of the carbon markets landscape. The toolkit is designed specifically for use by policymakers and government officials in host countries, but it is informative for a range of other carbon market stakeholders too. The toolkit also features 5 steps to developing strategies and policies to participate in carbon markets with practical case studies and best practice examples. Originally published in 2023, the toolkit has been updated to reflect the most recent developments in the carbon market space. We've widened the reach across 4 languages: English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. The updated toolkit supports policymakers to make strategic use of carbon markets, to mobilize finance for national climate and development plans, such as nationally determined contributions, climate prosperity plans, long-term low-emission development strategies, and sustainable development priorities. To ensure alignment with NDCs, making strategic decisions on Article 6 and voluntary carbon markets, and enabling accurate tracking of emission reductions and removals. Ensuring projects align with national priorities, comply with national and local laws, apply strong social and environmental safeguards, and guarantee equitable benefit sharing with stakeholders. Carbon markets can also be integrated into wider national carbon pricing policies, such as carbon taxes, enabling entities to meet obligations with carbon credits. Independent carbon markets, also known as voluntary carbon markets, Article 6 and compliance markets are complementary carbon market modalities that can be linked and attract and leverage greater private sector finance. The toolkit takes a holistic approach, enabling policymakers to assess opportunities across all 3, align them with NDC priorities, and ensure coherence to that these markets work together. When engaging with carbon markets, governments act as facilitators, regulators, and/or as implementers. They can act as facilitators by providing policy certainty, creating incentives, and publicly encouraging investment in activities that generate carbon credits. Governments create an enabling environment for carbon investments by offering predictable, efficient, and standardized processes for granting approvals and authorizations, reporting to registries, providing guidance on benefit sharing and rights, and communicating with relevant national and subnational authorities. Governments can also convene public-private working groups or discussions to co-develop carbon market activities. As regulators, they institute rules on participation and trading legally, enforcing safeguards, and establishing and maintaining national registries. Governments also decide whether and how to implement Article 6, which includes making decisions about authorization of mitigation outcomes for trade or counting them towards NDCs. Setting up registries, appointing agency focal points, and identifying priority sectors for investment. They can also act as implementers, directly supporting the delivery of carbon market activities. For example, in the context of REDD+, governments can sponsor jurisdictional and nested programs. In the toolkit, there are 5 sheets, each addressing one broad topic broken down into policy-relevant considerations. The first is on deciding if and when to engage in carbon markets, mapping existing activities, and if decided, what to consider in developing a strategy for carbon market engagement. The second provides guidance on determining the country's finance needs and suitable instruments. It then goes into finance through carbon markets, and when deployed strategically, carbon markets can leverage other sources of larger finance and foster public-private partnerships. The third contains significant updates since the original version, now focusing on determining a country's Article 6 strategy. The fourth is on legal and institutional matters across capacity required. And lastly, there's a sheet on how to go about ensuring high-integrity carbon market activities, reflecting the latest updates from both VCMI and ICVCM's work. We recommend this flow in its use. However, the sheets in the toolkit can be read and used in any order, depending on specific country priorities and needs. With the rules for Article 6 finalized, COP29 brought structure and certainty to the market. This new decision sheet supports policymakers to develop a clear strategy for Article 6 engagement. It provides clarity on Article 6 cooperative approaches and the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, PACM, under paragraph 6.4. With authorizations which require corresponding adjustments, governments will need to carefully consider risks explained in this chapter, such as overselling, and be able to robustly assess the pros and cons of conducting corresponding adjustments. Lastly, governments will also need to set out clear processes for reporting, project approvals, and authorizations for international transfer of mitigation outcomes. In addition to clarifying carbon rights, this update provides further guidance on building strong internal institutional coordination across ministries to effectively implement carbon market strategies, establishing robust safeguards crucial to preventing harm to indigenous peoples, local communities, and biodiversity from poorly designed and implemented projects. It also provides guidance on the impact of fees and levies. Governments now need to weigh the benefits of levy revenue against the risk of disincentivizing carbon market activities. And it concludes with a new regulatory checklist and benefit sharing recommendations. We welcome you to download the updated toolkit today through this QR code, and it's also available on the website. It is now time to learn about putting the approach of the toolkit into practice by exploring a case study. And I invite my colleague, George, to the virtual stage. Over to you, George.
Great. Thank you very much, Bianca. Hi, everyone. I'm George Hodgetts in VCMI's Policy and Partnerships team, leading our access strategies portfolio development. I'm very pleased to be hosting a short discussion today with a direct recipient of support through the Access Strategies Programme. And we're privileged to be joined by Angel Ureña, Deputy Climate Change Director at Panama's Ministry of Environment. Angel, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we dive into the discussion, let me just start by saying it's been a real pleasure collaborating with you and the rest of the team in the Ministry of Environment, Panama, this year. Your ambitious climate agenda is certainly an inspiration to us all. So perhaps to kick off, Angel, you could share a bit about where Panama is now on its journey to leverage high integrity, high value carbon markets and how that has evolved over time.
Hello, do you listen to me?
We can hear you.
I don't know, I have a problem with the camera. Something is wrong.
We can hear you well, Angel. No problem. If the camera doesn't work, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, George. And I'm really thankful for the support given by VCMI in this process to make possible the carbon market in Panama. I also thanks all the team at VCMI for all the kindly support given to the Ministry of the Environment in Panama. And I think to answer your question, it's going to take me a little time because a little long time because I don't want to leave any detail from this journey that we have been taking for a while right now. And I have to begin with what is the expectative in the country for the carbon market. And Panama is a highly strategic and we are in a very active phase of the carbon market journey. even though we have an extensive forest cover, which increases absorption capacity, and we are one of the 3 carbon neutral countries in the world, we are convinced that we need to put together this framework to make sure that the carbon market works in Panama. We represent only the 0.039% of global emissions in the year 2021, and that's excluding the forestry sector. But to protect these resources while advancing its national climate commitments, the country has begun developing. Okay, now I have the camera. The country has begun developing and structuring a high-integrity national carbon market, and that's partially thanks to VCMI. Through the implementation of this market, the country seeks to make a deliberate shift from informal participation in markets to a strategic approach to regulate markets. Panama partnership with organizations as VCMI is a key indicator of this progression, and it signals a commitment to aligning its domestic framework with global best practices and the principles of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. We're convinced on that. The recent publication of a national roadmap of its carbon market available in the National Platform for Climate Transparency is a testament of this evolution and outlining a clear path forward that includes a national registry and planned carbon exchange. In terms of specific activities, the country has focused on establishing a robust regulatory framework that will enable the implementation of a national carbon market currently under the Panamanian Ministry of the Environment. Progress is being made on 4 regulatory tools that seeks to contribute to this end. First is the development of a proposed framework law on climate change that will include a specific chapter on carbon markets, and I'm glad to announce that we already finished the public participation process, and I hope we will be ready to go to the National Assemblies in a couple of weeks. So that's a very good news. Also, we are developing an executive decree on carbon markets. We already also got some feedback from important sectors in Panama regarding this regulatory framework for carbon markets, and it will facilitate the operationalization of the national market by establishing processes, requirement, rules, and function. This decree is in the draft stage and soon will begin the public consultation. Its development has been supported, and I'm really thankful to VCMI with the support of VCMI. So thank you all the team at VCMI. Also, we're developing an executive decree on blue carbon to establish the procedure for concession in mangrove areas to promote development of blue carbon projects. And this decree is currently undergoing adjustments. So that will be also, we expect, ready by the end of this year. Also, by the Forestry Directorate at the Ministry of Environment, we are reviewing and updating the existing forestry regulation to establish carbon ownerships and requirements for forest carbon projects, and this activity will begin this year, 2025 also. So we have a very full agenda now, George. In addition, with the support from VCMI, the country has made progress in complying with the participation requirements of Article 6.4, submitting the activities for approval by the host countries under the PACM, and is moving forward with the transition from the CDM to Article 6.5. Finally, and I already said that it was gonna take me a long time to explain all the details of your question. Finally, the country is advancing in discussions on the legal nature of carbon credits in conjunction with other government entities such as the Ministry of Economy and Finance and the Superintendency of Securities. And these activities is also being supported by VCMI through the hiring of experts in the field. So that was quite the explanation of what is your journey for carbon markets in Panama going on. So thank you very much, George.
Thanks very much, Angel. That was a fantastic and very comprehensive overview, and congrats on all the progress made to date. Look, I think we all know it's still early days in terms of Article 6 implementation in particular, but we have a lot of policymakers on the line with us today. So I wondered if you could share perhaps what impact Panama is already starting to see from this work, in terms of conversations with investors perhaps, or the political interest that you're getting at a very top level.
Yeah, sure, George. The impact is multifaceted and growing. And on the political front, there is a strong appetite to leverage carbon markets as a tool for sustainable development, as evidenced by the high-level engagement at recent climate event hosted by Panama. Also, the government, particularly through the Ministry of the Environment, is actively seeking and forming a strategic partnership to build institutional capacity. Also, in terms of finance and investors' interest, Panama is positioning itself as a leader in green and blue investment, and with the partnership of VCMI and the development of a national carbon market, we're designing to de-risk this market for investors, creating a more transparent and predictable environment. This is expected to mobilize significant debt-free climate finance to help substantial funding gaps for Panama climate and nature-related goals. The focus is on attracting investment that only generates carbon credit, not only generates carbon credit, but also provides benefits for local communities, biodiversity, and sustainable development.
Thanks again, Angel. And one of the things you mentioned there was the Nature Summit earlier this year in Panama, which our team was delighted to be able to join and support and see the impact being generated through these activities firsthand on the ground. Next question. I mean, such technical policy areas are never always plain sailing. So perhaps you could share with us some of the challenges or obstacles you've experienced when developing Panama's carbon market strategy, and how you've been overcoming them.
Okay. Well, for developing a robust carbon market strategy, we have faced several challenges, and that's normal. And I guess all the countries and other activities that have been developed by other countries are facing the same. One of the primary obstacles has been the need to enhance capacity building, technical expertise, both with government agencies and across private sector. The complexities of carbon pricing Article 6 mechanism and the international standard require a high level of specialized knowledge. And we are trying to overcome this situation by first leverage a strategic partnership, collaborating with international experts and organizations like VCMI to receive in-house support, technical training, and guidance on carbon market development. Also, for the other gap related to legal and regulatory framework, we're focusing on creating a clear and transparent regulatory environment to provide certainty to stakeholders. That's very important. This includes the developing of national emission registry and formalizing the legal basis for the carbon market. And finally, there is also the need to stakeholder engagement, and we are engaging with various public and private sector entities, as well as indigenous and local communities, to ensure the market is designed to be equitable and inclusive.
Really important points there. Last quick question before we wrap up. I wonder if you could share what's next for Panama's engagement with carbon markets. What priorities do you have over the next 6 to 12 months?
Okay, Panama next steps are focused on implementation and scaling, and we have several priorities in the short and medium run. First, operationalizing the national carbon markets and launching the national registry, and finalizing the legal and institutional framework to allow the formal trading of carbon credits. Also, the development of portfolio of high integrity projects, and we are focusing on creating and validating projects that are aligned with the country's national climate goals and Article 6. Important mobilizing investment, and that's important. For that, we need the new framework and tools, such as the VCMI Carbon Market Access Toolkit, that has been really helpful for us to actively attract international buyers and investors who are committed to high integrity credits. Also, we are into the driving green and blue investment flows, broadening the scope beyond forestry to include sectors like sustainable agriculture, coastal ecosystem, and renewable energy, thereby driving more diversified and sustainable economic transition. Finally, Panama is committed to leading by example, demonstrating how a carbon negative nation can use high integrity carbon markets to not only meet the climate commitments, but also to foster a new model of sustainable, inclusive, and climate resilient economic growth. Thank you, George.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Angel. And, great to hear on the ground examples of countries using the toolkit already. That's been an incredibly enlightening conversation. And I really look forward to continued collaboration with you and the team in the Ministry of Environment, Panama. Back to you, Bianca.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angel, and thank you, George. And now to explore how governments can harness the catalytic role of carbon markets in greater depth, I'm pleased to invite Mark Kenva, VCMI's Executive Director, to moderate a panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Bianca. It's a pleasure to be here today, but also in particular, pleasure to be launching the updated version of the Carbon Market Access Toolkit. I know from the work that the team in VCMI have done, but also testimonials from the partners we've worked with over the last 3 years of this, that it has made a significant difference, not only on its own, but also in collaboration with a number of other organizations and initiatives. And this panel brings some of those people together to discuss that. And in this panel, we want to explore the promise and potential of high integrity carbon markets, the challenges emerging markets and developing economies face when aligning carbon market strategies with climate and sustainable development plans, and how they can navigate these challenges. And just before I introduce the panelists, I think that last point about aligning carbon market strategies with climate and sustainable development plans is vitally important and at the heart of VCMI's access strategies work and the work we do with our partners, that carbon markets are not seen as something on the side, separate from other climate actions and from other sustainable development financing, but are integrated into and can play a transformational and catalytic role in net zero development strategies, climate prosperity plans, and so on. So I'm delighted to introduce my 3 panelists today who all have deep expertise in this area. First, Leticia Guimaraes. She's head of carbon markets at the United Nations Development Programme. UNDP, as you probably know, works in about 170 countries and territories to build resilience, and has been a key partner in the development of the Carbon Market Access Toolkit. Second, Lorna Ritchie, Director of Public Affairs at the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which is the international standard setter on the supply side in voluntary carbon markets, but goes way beyond that, enabling countries alongside us and others to access carbon markets with integrity and with the catalytic and transformational impact I mentioned. And last, but by no means least, Jason Gray, who is the Project Director of the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, a subnational collaboration of 45 states and provinces working to protect tropical forests, reduce deforestation, and promote pathways to forests maintaining rural development. And carbon markets clearly have a role to play in that. So, Leticia, if I could turn to you first. Maybe you could lay out, in your opinion, and UNDP's view, how can a holistic strategy for accessing high-integrity carbon markets unlock finance and accelerate implementation of nationally determined contributions in emerging markets and developing economies? Leticia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and greetings to everyone who are here with us at this important webinar. I would like to thank the VCMI for the invitation and for this 3 years partnership in developing important tools to enable decision-making by policymakers. I believe emerging markets and developing economies face a massive climate finance gap in the order of trillions of dollars annually to meet their NDCs. And this is where high integrity carbon markets can offer a powerful solution to bridge the gap in finance for the achievement of NDC. When designed with environmental and social integrity at their core, carbon markets can mobilize private capital that complements other types of finance and channel resources directly to countries and communities that wouldn't otherwise get access to this type of resources. At UNDP, integrity is a non-negotiable when it comes to carbon markets. With the High Integrity Carbon Markets Initiative that we launched in 2023, we support countries to build robust MRV systems, national registries, and safeguards that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. It is very important to emphasize the importance of transparency, additionality, but also social equity, the inclusion of indigenous people's rights and other communities in the development of these opportunities, and of having clear benefit sharing mechanisms so that carbon markets can truly achieve its potential. I believe that carbon markets can unlock finance in 3 different ways. First of all, by providing a predictable revenue stream that de-risks other investments and improve the bankability across sectors, from renewable energy to forestry to clean cooking. Second, blended finance models allow carbon revenues to amplify public and multilateral support for the different clean technology initiatives that are coming up. And third, jurisdictional and sectoral approaches create scale and liquidity, enabling institutional investor engagement. This is not theoretical. We talk about this for many years, but at UNDP, we are actually supporting several countries and subnational jurisdictions through readiness and implementation, and they are already moving forward, both in Article 6, voluntary, at domestic and international scale. When embedded in national planning, carbon markets not only accelerate NDC delivery, but also deliver other social and sustainable development benefits. It drives technology transfer, it incentivizes innovation. When countries have the ownership to deliver and to decide on how to engage on carbon markets, they can ensure that credits and the corresponding adjustments reflect the national ambition cycles. Many developing countries hold large-scale, cost-effective mitigation potential. The key issue here is how to unlock this potential, and that is through the right governance and capacity. And instruments such as this toolkit enable this decision-making to be done on the basis of data and considering all the elements that are needed so that carbon markets exceeds the expectations, creates jobs, conserves biodiversity, and builds resilience in these countries. I think with this toolkit, Mark, we are giving a very clear message to the world in general that high integrity carbon markets are not the silver bullet, but they have a powerful ability to move the needle forward and to enable countries to attract finance and deliver their NDCs. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Leticia. You covered a lot of ground there, some of which I will hopefully have time to come back to. But I think that key point about how carbon markets on their own are not a silver bullet, but can leverage so many other things is at the heart of the access strategies work, but also how I believe countries can best be thinking about carbon markets as part of their broader package of policies and measures. Let me turn now to Jason from the Governor's Climate Task Force. What are the main challenges? You work closely with subnational governments in particular, and through our access strategies work, we've also done some work in Mexico with Yucatan, as you know. What are the main challenges that subnational governments face when aligning carbon market strategies with their climate plans?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks VCMI for including the GCF task force today. It's great to see longtime partners like the NDC and UNDP and others. I think some of the challenges subnationals face are the same challenges that national governments face. I mean, these are large-scale governments, and I've got three main ones I'll focus on, although there's definitely more. I think one is just ensuring that investors and corporates better understand governments and the realities faced on the ground. I think there's a lot of focus. There's been a lot of focus in carbon market discussions over the years on kind of buyer needs and integrity, and those are critically important. But I think it's really key that corporates and potential partners for governments and communities really also understand what's really going on the ground. And I think this toolkit really helps get that across in terms of governments need to understand increased capacity, but also on the other side, the demand side also would benefit from having more engagement with government. So that's one, improving the understanding across different parties. I think a second challenge really is around capacity, both resource capacity in terms of internal funding, access to funding, and then staffing capacity. I think the explanation that Angel gave for the work in Panama is a key example, and that also applies to subnational governments that we work with. So finding ways as all of us to work together to help increase that capacity, that's really what the GCF task force tries to help set, is looking for that internal expertise within different subnational governments and communities and partners, pairing that with other governments and communities within our network. And I think the partners on this call, including VCMI and UNDP, have really helped on that, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all. I think the third is really, how are subnational governments? Many of them are very large. Some of them are larger than national governments in the EU. How are they looking to align, or how can they align their priorities and realities with what's going on at the national level? And I think there's great examples of that underway now in Brazil in terms of alignment from GCF task force members in the Brazilian Amazon with the emerging emission trading system. But really that challenge is a challenge for all of us. How do we help support better alignment, leveraging this carbon market tool amongst a larger suite of policies? And those subnational governments, they face those same types of challenges. I think a difference often is there's a lot more focus of finance access, loans, carbon markets at the national level. So how do we make sure those tools are also available at the subnational level? And the GCF task force, VCMI, I think the toolkit and the best practice guide for Yucatan and the emerging ones coming out for some of our member states in Brazil are very exciting opportunities to help push that forward. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jason. Again, a lot to unpack there. I've done work in the past with subnational governments, and I know that often the tensions that subnationals want to go faster, and the national government doesn't want to be put to shame or doesn't want to have to follow suit, but other times it can be the other way around. So a lot to unpack there too. But let me now turn to Lorna from ICBCM. Why is the holistic approach we've been talking about, rather than just focusing on individual projects, including safeguards, MRV systems, institutional readiness, why is that so important on the supply side for ensuring carbon markets contribute meaningfully to our climate goals?
Thanks, Mark, and hi everyone. I'm Nora Ritchie, I'm from the Integrity Council. So just a bit of context about the Integrity Council. So we're a governance body focused on the integrity of carbon credits. So we assess programs and their methodologies to check that they meet the threshold set out in our assessment framework. And then once they've met that threshold, they can be CCP labelled. So for us, integrity is not just about making sure that each credit is verified additional emissions reductions. It's also, and you talked about this at the beginning, Mark, about making sure that sustainable development, there's free, prior, informed consent, and that there's protection of nature all included in this integrity threshold. So it's really important that we have this kind of holistic approach when we're looking at the integrity of projects. I think, and Jason, you kind of touched on this as well, but there's been a lot of focus on the demand side, and that is really important, but it's also really important that we're scaling high integrity supply, and some of those barriers you mentioned, Mark, and the work that the VCMI toolkit is doing really help to support on the supply side more projects to engage in carbon markets, more countries to engage in carbon markets as well. So we CCP label credits at the moment represent 4% of the market, and there's a very strong pipeline. But it's really important that we scale that and we grow the proportion of the market that is high integrity. So we're also and VCMI are participating as well in many of them, working on our continuous improvement work programs, which look at some of the issues that you just mentioned around digital MRV. So how can we improve that? How can we make it more accessible in local communities? VVBs, we hear a lot from market actors that there's challenges in scaling projects and the time it takes for projects to get to the point where they can issue. And so that's an area where we're looking to launch a work program on that in the coming months. Small projects as well. We've heard from a lot of countries that particularly with small projects, it can be very difficult to meet the threshold and achieve high integrity. So we're looking at how we can improve accessibility there as well. And market transparency is another area. We've just concluded a work program on this. So it's looking at how much money is actually reaching the local level and how can we scale that? How can we improve the transparency at every stage to make sure it's clear for investors where the money is going? And that is all with the aim of scaling investment and making sure that there's transparency about the price of credits and is it a fair price that countries are receiving for credits. We're also launching, and it will complement the VCMI toolkit, a guide for governments focused around the CCPs later this year as well.
Excellent. Now that guide is really something to look forward to. And we know that in our engagement with governments, they're interested in how to work with the CCP. So that's great. I think also very interesting points about small projects, given that most of the world's economy is run by small businesses. If we're only thinking about big projects, we're excluding a large part of the world's economy that also needs to transition to net zero. And then finally, I think your point about transparency, it's quite interesting how carbon markets and the voluntary carbon market are actually almost leading the way for all types of finance and all sorts of development activities because of our focus on transparency and making sure that everything is clear to all stakeholders. So good lessons there. Let me come back, Laetitia, to you. We mentioned, the latest module of the Access Toolkit is on Article 6, and Bianca mentioned how those rules have now been more or less put in place, and obviously work's going on, still underway on methodologies. How, in your experience, are emerging markets and developing economies navigating this evolving Article 6 landscape? And what opportunities, or perhaps risks, does it present for NDC delivery and market access?
Thank you, Mark. This is such an important question because with Article 6, the line is blurry, between voluntary and Article 6. And Article 6 in itself presents both opportunities and challenges due to its complexities. At the same time, Article 6 enables countries to strengthen their international cooperation and deliver mitigation outcomes in a cost-effective way. But to do that, they have to make investments in strengthening governance, in improving transparency, and in this strategic alignment with the NDC. So countries are navigating this landscape in different ways, and it's so important to have this toolkit to support them in this navigation. At UNDP, we work with a few countries that are already pioneers in international cooperation. And we see that some countries are moving quickly, signing several bilateral agreements, piloting ITMO transactions, while others are building the foundation first and trying to see where the market goes. So while they're investing in registries, authorization processes, and the MRV, they're also on a wait and see holding mode to see who moves first and what will be the transactions and prices paid and so forth. But to me, there are two major opportunities that stand out with Article 6. The first one is enabling technology transfer and innovation systems through these cooperative approaches. And the second one is increasing the ambition cycles, helping countries not just meet, but also exceed their NDCs. But the risks are real. Countries that transfer these mitigation outcomes that have lower costs may in the future need to compensate these transfers with emission reductions that are more costly. So it's very important for countries to estimate the actual cost of ITMOs, and not only of the activity and technology per se, but also consider the whole cost of making corresponding adjustments to the NDC. Without this careful consideration of all the variables, countries may lock in low credit prices and lose the mitigation outcomes through poor adjustments or create inequities across sectors. Capacity gaps can also lead to the exclusion of some markets. You may lose an opportunity in the volunteer market due to already committing it to Article 6, for example. So UNDP is actively supporting several countries on their readiness as part of the climate promise to make sure that they do the strategic and optimal allocation of their assets. We help design authorization process, operationalize the registries and transparency systems, and very importantly, set up the safeguards to ensure environmental and social integrity. Our support ensures that the cooperation strengthens and doesn't fragment the NDC delivery. And to me, having a single toolkit that presents both opportunities is very key for policymakers that often complain to us about the fragmentation of the support that they see available to them. So with you and other partners, we are always working to standardize tools and templates and support these feasibility assessments so that countries are better positioned to make these agreements with the different buyers of these potential ITMOs. In summary, for us, Article 6 is a critical opportunity, but only if navigated with integrity, strategy, and inclusiveness. And UNDP role is to ensure that countries are equipped to seize the benefits while also managing the risks. And this is why this toolkit is such a good asset for all the policymakers out there. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Leticia. Now, final question for you, Jason. So how can collaboration across governments, technical assistance partners, and the private sector actors help emerging markets and developing economies really harness carbon markets as a catalyst for climate ambition and sustainable development? Obviously, your perspective comes from a forest angle, and very interested to hear about that.
Thanks, Mark. I'll go pretty quickly. I know we're at time here. My perspective also comes from the compliance markets, working for a long time in the California compliance market. So that's where my thoughts are coming from. You know, for subnational governments we work with, they're looking to really create a new forest economy. Carbon markets is one part of the tool. So I think collaboration is key for every part of that new forest economy approach. The challenge here really is there's been ever evolving standards, which are good for increasing integrity, for increasing transparency. That's often challenging for governments who have not always been at the table in the design of those standards until after the fact to catch up to really apply the work that they've done for some of them for decades. So I think collaboration is key to kind of bring those together. And that's why we're so excited about this toolkit, because it does exactly that. I think, I've heard anecdotally or directly from certain developers wanting to come in and invest in projects in a country or even in a jurisdictional approach. On the project side, I've literally heard people say, why do I need to engage with government? I just assume that this will have a corresponding adjustment. That's what my investor, my ultimate buyer wants. That's not how this works. So I think collaboration is key to making sure all parties in that ecosystem really understand the needs, the challenges, the opportunities, and the realities. And as Leticia said, this toolkit really helps governments, but I also think on the demand side, it should help folks really better understand the needs and challenges governments face. So collaboration on that capacity building we talked about, on those cost estimates and assessments that Leticia just mentioned around Article 6. These are key things, and collaboration is the only way to make them happen. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jason, and thanks to the panelists for their comments so far, but also thanks to all of you in the audience who've been putting questions in the Q&A box. We are not going to have time to address all of those, but Lorna, if I can, quick question for you, hopefully with a quick answer, although it's a big question. If done correctly, will carbon markets really contribute meaningfully to climate change goals, or are they just a distraction? Does the aggregation get us anywhere closer to where we need to be? Lorna, perhaps you can take a first crack at that, and Leticia and Jason, if you want to add anything, please do.
Yes, I mean, the reason I'm in this job is because I believe that is possible. And I think Lydia put it well at the beginning around the potential size of the prize. It's not just about the scale as well, it's also about the accessibility of that finance. And the fact that when you're using carbon credits, it's directly to a project level that has a material impact on mitigation and sustainable development in that country. So I think there's huge potential from carbon markets. And very cheekily, can I just add a point on the Article 6? And I see there's a question on that as well. I think it's increasingly the case that compliance and voluntary markets are converging. And I think it's really important that they have the same threshold, they're subject to the same level of integrity. Both Article 6 credits and voluntary credits can both be used for compliance, can both be used for voluntary. And so it's really important that we have that harmonisation between the two. And that's part of the work that the ICVCM is doing as well.
Thanks, Donna. Nothing cheeky about an intervention. Very important. I think a really important message. So thank you for that. We've kind of run out of time on this panel, and I suspect the audience would agree that we could go on for another hour happily, because a lot of really interesting detail that we could dig into. But we haven't got time, so let me thank Lorna, Leticia, and Jason for your time this afternoon. Some really interesting interventions. I suspect you'll have a long list of emails from people on this webinar asking to hear more. So that's testament to your expertise and fantastic communications. Now, however, let me introduce a good friend of VCMI, good friend of us all, I believe, but also a real genuine climate change hero, His Excellency Mohammed Nasheed. He is the Secretary General of the Climate Vulnerable Forum and heads the Secretariat. As you know, prior to that, he was the Maldives' first democratically elected president and Speaker of the People's Majlis, the Maldives Parliament, from 2019 to 2023. You'll remember, those of you who are a little bit older like me, that in 2009, when he founded the Climate Vulnerable Forum, he held an underwater cabinet meeting to call for stronger action on climate change, and also pledged for the Maldives to become carbon neutral. So, Mohammed, I'm so delighted to have you on this call. Over to you to provide some closing remarks to this webinar.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and too many kind comments there. Yes, it's been a long time. Crossing the 1.5 degree Celsius threshold has often been framed through the lens of grand global campaigns or eradicate harmful practices, or through the ambitious pledges by wealthy nations. But for the world's climate vulnerable, it is far more personal. It means bracing for yet another deadly typhoon, enduring the grief of a failed harvest, and facing the numbing hunger that follows loss of livelihoods. When will our support for frontline communities move beyond voices of promises echoing through negotiating halls and every global summit? We have been to these summits a lot. I've spent a whole lifetime going to them. Well, will it be when more lives are lost, when more land turns to dust, when rising seas swallow yet another island? This is no longer an era of surrendering to vulnerability. It's a pivotal moment to transform these challenges into bankable opportunities. While waiting for the global financial system and the world leaders to finally fulfill their long promised development-oriented reforms, we also need to double our efforts in empowering these climate vulnerable nations to unlock additional capital streams, allowing them to invest in convergence of climate, development, and nature. The CVFV20 believes that carbon finance is among the levers to realize this vision. Carbon finance holds immense potential as a building block to advance national economic resilience, social equity, climate action, and biodiversity prosperity, all while unlocking new streams of capital for countries facing the deepest climate funding gaps and the greatest climate vulnerability. Building the capacity of the world's most climate vulnerable countries to engage in high-tech carbon market is a critical step towards delivering climate justice, advancing global climate goals, and ensuring that benefits reach the frontline communities most affected by the climate crisis. Supporting climate vulnerable states to tap into carbon markets is a step closer unleashing these bankable opportunities. First, we recognize the CVFV20, we recognize carbon markets as one of the levers to create access to additional $220 billion annually to CVFV20 countries by 2030. I think there was a question on that. So our answer is this. If we are able to make access to carbon credits, there is another $20 billion annually available to CVFV20 or climate vulnerable countries. Secondly, mobilizing funding streams for national strategies, scaling carbon markets through high integrity standards. Standardized projects could expand nature and climate investment pipelines. Having the cost of capital of implementing national climate plans, known as nationally determined contribution, and supporting other development goals. Third, and finally, we think would provide governments with increased revenue, particularly for nature-based solutions, mitigation and resilience, whilst aligning emission reduction with national priorities. The result could mean a sevenfold impact for the host country of carbon projects. Now, these benefits are no longer it's no longer a wish or wishful thinking. They are within reach. The VCMI's Carbon Market Access Toolkit makes a critical step towards empowering developing countries to access and capitalize on these opportunities. The toolkit is not just another document or on the shelf. It's not for you to keep it in your library. It is a comprehensive and strategic guide supporting countries and its policymakers in leveraging the carbon market to attract investment at national and subnational levels. The solutions and process we were presented before us, waiting for us to step forward. to our 74 member states, to all the world's climate vulnerable nations, I urge you to make a big decision before another disaster comes claiming multitudes of communities and labor opportunities. CVFV20 nations and other developing nations forging a path towards resilience can access assistance from the VCMI's Carbon Market Access Toolkit. So on behalf of the CVFV20 Secretariat, before I thank you, Mark, we still do not know how much carbon coral is capturing. We know that seaweeds and mangroves are doing that, but we are not clear about calcification and coral. Among climate vulnerable countries are island nations, and these islands don't have the forests, but they have huge reef systems. So I'm sure we will work towards that science. It's not your work, Mark, or VCMI's work to do that. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And we are very glad that we are partnering with you. And we would like to continue doing this work with you. And I also thank the UNDP for hosting this initiative. And to all who participated, your enthusiasm is a good start to fuel our vision of prosperity into reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General Mohammed Nasheed. It is always an honor to have you join us. Thank you, everyone who has contributed to the rich discussions today, and I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. Please do visit the website to download the toolkit and read more about VCMI's work and get in touch with us if you have any other questions. Please note that we will have another event at Africa Climate Summit 2 to help policymakers use the toolkit. If you will be on the ground, please express your interest in attending the event on the day and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.